See, what I love is there's a recurring theme because with each story you're asking, were you cool? And it's like, no, I was so not cool. I was never cool.
I'm all grown up. SYKE!
Ladies and gentlemen, our guest today is a legendary writer of screen, television, books, and video games. He's worked with the likes of Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, Don Bluth, and more to make us laugh and cry through our childhoods. Through his illustrious career, he has always been the last or only writer on all the movies he's done. He has served up burgers at Arby's, written 12 Disney Channel original movies, and is now a TikTok star and professor to the very lucky students of UC Riverside. Please welcome Stu Krieger.
Thank you. What a pleasure to be here. And what a great introduction. You've done your research.
Oh, I try, man. I try. Well, how's your day going so far?
Cannot complain.
Glad to hear it. Glad to hear it. Well, to dive right in, you grew up in Rochester, New York, and one of the things that was really cool for me to hear is that you Zoom weekly with your day one homies from elementary school. Is that still the case?
It is very much the case. It started in COVID, and I figured once we got back to life, everybody would go, yeah, that was great while it lasted, but it's still happening every Thursday night.
That's beautiful, man. You're 72 years old, if I'm not mistaken.
You are correct.
So that is a long-lasting set of friendships right there.
You betcha.
Wow. Well, I mean, it's funny. My friends from middle school are still my closest friends to this day, and I imagine that when we're in our 70s, it will remain the same.
I hope so. It's really such a beautiful thing because one of the things for us is we've been able to maintain the continuity of our relationship, and
Yeah.
we get together, we vacation together with our wives, with our kids sometimes.
Wow.
And so it's an evolving friendship as opposed to it's not based on, hey, remember that time we got drunk in high school?
Right,
We can
right.
still talk about our current lives, our current families. Now most of us have grandchildren, and it's been a beautiful evolution to share.
That's amazing, man. Well, growing up in Rochester, what were some of your favorite Halloween memories as a kid?
Well, one of the things I always talk about of why I live in Southern California for the last 50 years is Halloween in Rochester meant you would plan these incredibly wonderful, elaborate costumes, and then it would snow and you'd have to have a parka over your costume or snow hats on that would completely ruin the effect. And so that's my most vivid memories of getting so pissed off that you'd be all set for whatever it was and then the weather wouldn't cooperate. Or I remember a couple of rainy years where you'd get 3/4 of the way through and the bottom of your bag would fall out because it was all soggy and the candy's all over the street.
Yes.
So most Halloween memories in Rochester are all about the weather.
I know that as a kid as well, you used to mail photos of yourself to Walt Disney asking to be in movies, preferably with Haley Mills, because you were a huge Parent Trap fan and obviously a huge Haley Mills fan. You had her posters all over your bedroom. And now you've gotten to work with her multiple times and you're still friends to this day, if I'm not mistaken.
Very much so.
Nice. Well, that's kind of a dream come true. I mean, how often does one get to be friends with their childhood crush? I'm so curious as to when you met her. Did you tell her at some point the extent of your childhood crush, or did you play it cool?
I was so not cool, not even a little bit. But the incredible thing with that whole relationship is there's always the be careful what you wish for.
Yeah.
And so part of how that friendship began was when I heard Disney was doing a sequel to The Parent Trap. So not the Lindsay Lohan remake, but a sequel for the Disney Channel featuring Haley as those characters grown up.
Sure.
I called my agent and I said, call them and tell them I will pay them if I can write this movie. They don't have to pay me. This is me. I was born for this. This is my destiny. And the agent called back and said, I tried, but there's a writer on it. It's in progress. Sorry, buddy. Not going to happen. And then my wife and I were on vacation in Hawaii, and I got a call at 5 a.m. because my agent forgot which way the time change went.
Oh,
and
no.
he said, the script came in. They're not happy with it. They have a very firm start date because Haley's doing a play on Broadway and needs to be in and out by these dates. Get back, have the meeting. There's a chance you can get the job. So we flew home, took the meeting. They said one of the problems is we would need a script in 3 weeks because of the deadlines with the filming. And I said, well, I think this is more an interior monologue because you never let them know what you can do. But I was like, I could write that tonight if I needed to.
Sure, yeah.
We said 3 weeks, piece of cake. And went home, wrote the script. 3 weeks later, I got a copy back from Michael Eisner, who was head of the studio at the time. And on the front cover, it said, great script, green light, let's go.
Wow.
And so I think it was only like 6 weeks after that, I was on a plane to Florida where we were shooting the movie. And about halfway through, I went, oh no, I'm about to meet my hero. What if everything, she's a horrible person or she's just inaccessible or whatever. And I started to have this panic. And I walked into the meeting the next morning where we were going to meet, and she walked in and she looked around and she said, "Which one of you is Stu?" And I said, "Here." And she said, "Darling, I love your script. Come give me a hug."
Wow.
And it was like, I'm hugging my first crush right now. This is pretty good.
Man, what a moment that must have been.
Very happy to have come and made the Parent Trap 2 sequel. And it was marvelous.
You kind of had a little revelation when you were on the Walt Disney backlot tour during a family vacation to Los Angeles that you were going to be a writer. So you started writing a lot, and in high school you even wrote a novel that you've since described as perhaps a bit cringy. But I was wondering, would you at least give us the log line or the premise to said novel?
Yeah, I think it's probably the premise of every novel a 16 or 17-year-old writes, because it was all about the angst of, what's my future going to be and where am I going to go? And before I start college, maybe I should do a road trip and experience life. And, so it was just angsty young person coming of age story.
Have you ever let anyone read it? Like your kids, your wife?
Nope.
But you do own it still. You still have it.
Yeah, I have a crate of stuff from my childhood, and every once in a while I'll pull it out, read 4 or 5 pages and go, yeah, I'm good. Back in the crate.
Nice. Yeah. In the vault, never to be released.
Yep.
You had your focus. So you graduated college, you moved to LA, you worked at Arby's over the summer to save up to move to LA. And then when you got here, you started dropping resumes around town to get a job. And the Los Angeles Herald Examiner newspaper was your first job. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So getting up to that point, when you got to LA, did you come with any particular plan of action in mind? And had you saved up enough to to rent a place when you got out here? Where were you staying? Were your parents helping you out a little bit? Tell us a little bit about that.
As you mentioned, I am now a college professor at UC Riverside. And every once in a while, I will slip and tell my students that my very first apartment in LA in Van Nuys, I was paying $45 a month rent.
Wow.
and the reason was, it was a 2-bedroom apartment and there were 4 of us. So it was $180 was the total rent, and
Wow.
split between the 4 of us, it was $45 a month. So that really is the main reason I was able to stay, because I did not come with a whole lot of savings. I was determined that I really did not want to be dependent upon my parents because, well, my mother was the quintessential Jewish mother. And so when I told them the plan, they acted fake supportive. And then the day I was leaving to drive across the country, she handed me this card, and I got in the car with my buddy Joey, who I was driving across the country. And the basic message of the card, including the first line, was, "I know this is what you feel you have to do, but if you move across the country, you'll break our hearts. But good luck."
Oh my God, the guilt trip.
But like I said, quintessential Jewish mother.
Man, so Joey came across with you for the same reason?
No, he actually just wanted a summer adventure and knew he was going back after a couple of weeks.
Okay.
But it was let's drive across the country together and, have a road trip and then figure it out from there.
Yeah.
So part of, not wanting to be dependent upon my parents was I need a job. The actual reason that you probably found somewhere in your research that I was able to stay was after a couple of months of not finding a job. One of my other buddies who was out visiting wanted to go audition for the Joker's Wild Game show.
Yes.
And he asked me to come along, and I got on the show and he didn't. He was a college buddy. We're still friends. I don't think we're ever together where he doesn't say, "The only reason you got on the show is your damn red hair." And at the time I had a big flaming red afro, and he was convinced that was the reason. I said, "No, buddy, I'm more charming and smarter than you are. That's why I got on."
Thanks.
But $1973, I ended up winning over $3,000 in prize money. And with my $45 a month rent, that was kind of what sustained me until I got the Herald job.
Enough to take. Wow. Okay. That's amazing, man. So I know at the Herald, you were getting advice from people on staff in the entertainment department. And also I read that you received advice from some celebrities that you may have interviewed. Do you remember a few of the major celebrities that you interviewed and what pieces of advice that you got?
Yeah, the thing that was really great about that, and it was so heartening in terms of, you tend to hear all the stuff about the egos in Hollywood and the terrible people and all the rest of it. And everybody that I encountered was so generous and so willing to help. And so I was able to do an interview with Sally Struthers, who played the daughter on All in the Family while that show was still on the air. And Suzanne Plachette, who played the wife on the Newhart show, again, while that show was on the air. And kind of how I set it up was I would be professional boy reporter, during the interview process, and then at the very end I go, hey, if you have 10 minutes, I'd love to pick your brain about, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm new in town. I'm just learning how things actually operate. And everybody was incredibly generous with their time, with their advice, and a lot of it that kind of consistently kept coming back. I also interviewed Frank Gorshin, who was the Riddler on Batman, and
Yes.
Telly Savalas, who had been Kojak, and with each of them it kept coming back. If you want to be a writer, you need an agent. Most production companies and producers in town won't read a script unless it comes for an agent because they're afraid of lawsuits and other just legal complications. So if you're putting time and energy into anything, try to get yourself an agent.
Sure.
And at the time, the Writers Guild published, again, pre-internet, pre-everything else, the Writers Guild published a list of agents, and then they would have an asterisk next to the agencies that were willing to read from unproduced writers. So there was probably 15 or 20 of them, and they tended to be the smaller, more boutique agencies.
Right.
And I just started sending query letters out to all of them. Here's who I am. Here's what I do. Here's a synopsis of a couple of scripts I've written. I would love to, have you read something. And finally, one of them reached back out and said, yes, please send us a couple of scripts. And I did, and got an agent.
Were you sending out original stuff or specs?
To begin with, it was all original stuff, because one of the things I had heard from somebody along the way was a lot of times agents want to see who you are as a writer, and a spec script just shows them you can write like somebody else or can write somebody else's show, but it's not really instructive to who you are. So the advice was, lead with original material, and then it doesn't hurt to have a spec in your quiver, but, lead with the original stuff.
Sure. Okay, so if I have this story correct, after you get an agent, that agent introduces you to a producer who asked you to be in a movie to gain some on-set experience, and it is during that movie that you met an actress named Hillary Horan, who you are now married to. Is that correct?
Damn, son, I am very impressed with the extent of the research, and yes, you are correct.
Amazing. Okay, we need to dive into that a little bit. I need to know, so like, give us a little bit of the romance. Did you just go on set, just spitting game? You saw Hillary and you were like, okay, I'm going after this. How did it play out?
See, what I love is there's a recurring theme, because with each story you're asking, were you cool? And it's like, no, I was so not cool. I was never cool. And once again, not cool. But what ended up happening, in July, we will celebrate our 43rd wedding anniversary.
Wow.
We have a second grandchild due any day, literally this week.
Beautiful.
So that's all very exciting. But in the very beginning, we did the classic Harry and Sally thing, meaning we were friends for a year and a half. So when I first met her on the film, I had, well, she's really cute. That's, kind of had a crush thing, but had no game whatsoever. So kind of would position myself at lunch near her and talk to her and try to get things going. And we just kind of fell into this very natural friendship first. And what was happening for that year and a half is we would go on terrible dates with other people, get home, and around midnight or 1 o'clock one of us would call the other and go, hey, what are you up to? Oh, I just got home from this awful date. No, mine was worse. And we'd be on the phone for like an hour and a half or something and go, okay, well, anyway, good night, and hang up. And like a year and a half into that, one night she called me, and she was up in Santa Barbara and said, I just had this really, really bad date. I got to get out of here. Can I come stay at your place? And she came down, and again, we stayed up really late talking. And then a couple weeks after that, we were having dinner, and she said, did you ever wonder why we're not together? And I said, yeah, I thought you didn't want to. And she said, I thought you didn't want to. But, and then we were together ever since.
That's amazing, man. It's crazy. It is eerily similar to my wife and I's story.
Nice. And the one thing I will say, to advice to those out there, is if we had not had that friendship, I don't know if the relationship would have lasted, because we were both kind of had a history of being the alphas in our relationships.
Yes.
And so even though we had this friendship, when we first got together as a couple, there was all this tussling and kind of turf war that we had to work out. And my pattern always in the past was, as soon as somebody challenged me, I usually bolted.
Right.
Oh, I'm not perfect. I'm out. See you later. And for some reason with Hillary, I didn't leave. And I think it was because we had that underlying base of friendship, and I knew there was something worth fighting for there. And I stuck around.
So true. I think that was the proper base for the relationship that my wife and I have as well, is that we were friends for basically a whole year before we got together. So same thing. We clashed a lot when we just got together, but because we were already such good friends, it was, we were able to figure out the communication style and stuff like that.
I love that.
Yeah, man. Wow. And so if I'm not mistaken, it was through Hillary and her acting work that you were able to meet and become friends with Gary Marshall. Is that correct?
That is very correct. Yeah, she was working for him at the time, and Gary was always very, very generous and curious about everybody's life that worked for him. The first day of work on all of his shows, when he was doing Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley and Mork and Mindy, he gave everybody a badge that said, "Life is more important than show business," which I still have in a shadow box in my office here. And so one day, if you know Gary at all, it was like, "So who's the fella you're dating?" And she said, "He happens to be a writer. What can I read? You got something I can read?" And she gave him one of my scripts that he ended up optioning. And even though that film never got made, he hired me to write another project with him that didn't get made. And then when he made his feature debut directing Young Doctors in Love, he brought me on to do a production rewrite. So I was on set every day just rewriting as things came up and as they needed more jokes and stuff, just sitting in a trailer, and he'd go, "We need something for this, think about that." And we'd send pages out, and that was really fun.
Wow, look at that. Was that script Kinsfolk?
No, actually the first script that he read was something called Spitting Images, which was about, it was kind of like a modern day Lord of the Flies a little bit, a group of kids that went bad in a suburban neighborhood.
Love it, love it.
And Gary, because so much of his work was humor based, I remember when he finished reading it, he called Hillary and said, "So the boyfriend's not a pisser." And she said, "No, he actually is really funny, but this was a dramatic script he wrote." So Kinfolk came later than that.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, that's really cool. I know that both Gary Marshall and Henry Winkler have been guests at your class, so that's I wish I was a student during those times. You're writing, you've done several teen focused projects, and then you decided to write Kinfolk, which was sort of an autobiographical story. Is that right?
Yeah. It was a multi-generational family reunion story where kind of all the secrets and all the resentments and everything that had been buried for a long time all exploded in the middle of this 60th anniversary party for the patriarch and his wife.
Love it, love it, love it. Are you familiar with Bollywood at all, Hindi cinema?
Uh-huh.
There's a movie, it's called Dil Dhadakne Do. That's sort of the premise of that film. You should check it out.
Oh, cool. Definitely.
Yeah. That script, though, even though the movie never got made, was the butterfly effect for the rest of your career, because it got sent out to producers, it was optioned, it never got made, but it made the American Film Magazine's list of 10 best unproduced screenplays, and that got you a job on A Year in the Life, which won an Emmy, correct?
Yes. So kind of the evolution of that, there was one step in between, which was the producers who eventually did A Year in the Life had just been hired to be exclusively the producers of Spielberg's first foray into television, Amazing Stories.
Yes.
So when they reached out to me, having read Kinfolk, they were on Amazing Stories. And the reason that series existed was Spielberg had all these ideas. He would always just scribble on napkins and envelopes and whatever was near him, just little ideas when they would come to him. And he realized one day that a lot of those things were more short stories than feature films. And so he went to the network and pitched the idea of an anthology series that some episodes would be a half hour, some would be an hour, some weeks it would be 2 half hours paired together.
Sure.
But he could take a bunch of these smaller ideas and do it that way. And it was Josh Brand and John Falsey who had been hired as the producers. And they called me in and they said, "We have a couple of episodes that need writers. We love your script. Steven read it and liked it as well. Here's one of the stories. Tell us how you would adapt it into the half hour." I pitched it to them. They liked it. I had to invent an ending for it because it didn't initially have one. And then when they gave it to Steven, I have a letter from him that's still framed on my office wall.
I seen a video of you in that letter, man.
Yeah. And basically said, I took his little story and made it one of his favorite episodes. Mark Hamill ended up starring in it. And it's out there in the universe called Gather Ye Acorns, but it was one of 3 episodes I ended up writing for Amazing Stories. And then when John and Josh left that, oh no, I know how it happened. They had taken their pilot for A Year in the Life to NBC, but because they were exclusive, they couldn't develop it further at the time. And so they said, we're going to take this and develop the pitch into our script. Can you write it for us? Because we're under exclusive contract. So I wrote the original pilot. It went back to NBC. Brandon Tartikoff, who was the head of the studio at the time, said, "What if we turn this into a miniseries, a 4-night, 4 seasons. So each episode was winter, spring, summer, fall of A Year in the Life, hence the title of this multi-generational family. And then by that time, John and Josh had left Amazing Stories. And for the miniseries, they wrote 3 hours of it, and I wrote the other 3 hours of a 6-hour miniseries. And as you mentioned, we won the Emmy for Best Miniseries that year.
Yeah, wow, man! I did not know that that Mark Hamill was the star of that episode. I have to check it out.
Yeah,
it was working on that series with Steven Spielberg that made him familiar with your work and led him to ask you to get involved in The Land Before Time.
Yep.
Before we get into that, I was thrilled to see that you still have the Pizza Hut Land Before Time puppets, the whole set, man. You have a lot of really cool memorabilia that you share on social media.
Well, you know what? It's part of why I'm terrified of retiring, because one of the things I was so happy with when I got the job at UC Riverside in 2006, where there was finally a place to store all of that rather than in my house. And so my office looks like somewhere between a Stuseum and a, whatever.
The Stuseum, I love it.
Yeah, and I'm trying to decide, because I'm retiring next year, June of 25.
Oh, it's already planned.
Yep.
Okay.
But I'm already panicking about what I'm going to do with all that stuff when I do retire. So.
You'll have to open up an official Stuseum, that's all.
There you go.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite piece of memorabilia? Is it that lamp of the dinosaurs getting to the tree stars?
It's pretty cool. And again, part of what was so touching about that was I had never even seen it before. And when the movie first came out, it was one of those completely overwhelming things I had never thought about. And Sears did a big promotion, and there were bed sheets and quilts and thermoses and lunch boxes and just, Land Before Time merchandise everywhere. And that lamp I had never seen among all the other stuff. And a student brought it into me, and he said, this was in my childhood bedroom. I thought maybe you'd like it.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, cool. Thank you. So that's pretty special.
That's heartwarming, man. Wow.
Yeah.
2 writers were on there, Judy Freudberg and Tony Geiss, but their initial draft was too juvenile for Steven Spielberg's and George Lucas's taste. So you were brought in to revise, and they actually made the comment to you that they feel that you've become a better writer since becoming a father.
Yep.
Is that because the different episodes that you wrote for the Spielberg series, did you have children in between those episodes?
No, they had read earlier stuff along the way and knew, my work. But then by the time I got affiliated with them, my son was 18 months old when I first started working for them. But then, obviously grew up during the time I was employed by them. And I think, so much of it is really related to the fact that you just look at the whole world in an entirely different way once you're a parent, in terms of both reliving childhood through their eyes, and then also just everything about the larger world and the way what you want to expose them to, when you want to expose them to it. And part of the reason that my career did take the turn into family entertainment when it did was my son from the very beginning, and he's now a writer-director himself, but from the very, very beginning, he would watch films over and over again. And I was getting the sense of how much of his modeling and playing and everything that he was doing was based on the things he was watching.
Yeah.
And I suddenly had this epiphany of, it doesn't have to be stupid. You don't have to talk down to kids. You can aspire to make them rise up and reach higher. And one of the things that became my mandate at Disney Channel, which you probably heard somewhere in the research, was just, I was so tired of seeing stupid fathers.
Yes.
They were completely bumbling and incompetent, and mom leaves the house for a half hour and the wash machine's walking across the room and the baby's missing. And, it's like, I will not do that. And so part of my legacy at Disney was I was always fighting with them about, I'm not putting a stupid bumbling father in anything I write. It's not happening.
Yeah, no, that's cool, man. I'm glad you drew that line in the sand and stuck to it. It is a poor stereotype. Obviously, those types of fathers do exist, but it's not representative of all fathers, by a long shot.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so you get in there, you get scraps of ideas to work with. You probably get like a folder that just has ideas. And after many debates with Steve and George and Don about what a dinosaur would or wouldn't say, we get the legendary Land Before Time. That movie, as you've probably heard a million times from your students and from your fans on social media, is known for traumatizing us. Made us cry as much as it made us laugh. But you have said that scene where Littlefoot's mom passes, spoiler alert if you haven't watched it yet, is one of your favorites that you've written. And of course, Steven Spielberg was the one who encouraged that sort of thing, being inspired by Bambi's mom and, hoping to spark emotional conversations between kids and their families. How did your kids feel about it when they watched it? And did it spark that kind of conversation with you guys at home?
Well, this may be way more information than you need. But my son always had a really dark side to him. And now, if you've looked at his own career at all, he really does a lot of horror films and psychological thrillers. And at one point, when he was a little tiny kid, he had his own little, mini director's chair that he would sit in front of the TV when he was like 4 years old. And he went through his Wizard of Oz phase that most kids do. And when the witch's face comes into the crystal ball and Dorothy's trying to get home and all that, and the witch's face gets bigger and bigger, every other kid we knew would run and like dive under the couch pillows or whatever. He would pull his director's chair a little closer to the TV.
Whoa.
So we're at the premiere, and we called him Darth Krieger. So we were at the premiere of Land Before Time. He was like 4.5 years old. There's footage somewhere of Entertainment Tonight interviewing him at the premiere. And my wife said, because I was sitting separate from them with the cast and crew, and my wife said, Littlefoot's mom dies. The kids all around her are crying. And she turned to our son and she went, "Isn't it sad?" And he went, "What?" And she said, "The mom died." And he goes, "I know." And she said for about 6 months after that, she slept with one eye open. So
damn, that's wild, man.
yeah, so I clearly did not traumatize him.
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, that seems to probably have been an early core memory for him to inspire him for his later career.
Exactly.
So there's at least one kid, Gus Krieger, that was not traumatized by Land Before Time.
That is correct.
Did you or do you pay attention to the reviews?
It's again, it's very funny because you can't not.
Yeah.
And people say that I never look at my reviews. I never read. I don't believe that entirely. But one of the things you just absolutely have to learn how to do is take all of it, the positive and the negative, with a grain of salt, because ultimately you can do your best work. And Lin-Manuel Miranda said something that I absolutely loved. Is he said, "Our job is to make the best art we can and let the world do with it what it will."
Yeah.
But one thing I can tell you is when I did the movie True Confessions for Disney Channel, it was Shia LaBeouf, and it was something I was very proud of, and the studio was really excited, and they were going to run Daytime Emmy Award, not campaign for it. And the morning it was going to premiere, I got up early, I went down, I got my LA Times off the front porch and opened the calendar section, and the review was terrible.
Oh,
it
man.
kind of eviscerated the movie, just didn't work for them. And I was, oh man, everybody in LA is going to see that. And I love this movie. Why'd they have to tear it apart? I'm so upset. And while I was stewing in my upsetness, a friend called and he said, "Do you get the New York Times?" I go, "No." And he goes, "Go online and see the review of your movie. It's amazing." And so I read it, and it's this glowing review. And then I go, well, the New York Times is a much better paper anyway.
Big facts.
They have much more credibility. But that's the kind of yin and yang you always have to navigate of, somebody's going to love it, somebody's going to hate it. You're never going to please everybody. So if that's how you define yourself or your work or your happiness or your joy, you're going to be miserable always. So,
Yes.
Go ahead and check it out, but do it with a grain of salt and move on.
Absolutely. I brought it up because I saw a review for Land Before Time that really just pissed me off. It was Peter Travers from People magazine, and he wrote, "The film had an unclear audience. The animation is fine, but Stu Krieger's screenplay contains violence that might be hard on the younger ones and a never let up cuteness that will turn minds of all ages to mush." Opened up #1 at the box office. One of the best kids films, children's movie of all time. Fuck you, Peter. That's all.
There you go.
Yeah.
And is at this point, last I knew, it sold over 100 million DVDs and VHS and
Wow.
copies and beyond its shelf life in theaters. So
Yeah, the lasting impact of that movie is insane. I mean, to the fact that it's transcending generations now, right? The kids that saw it in theaters are showing it to their children.
very much so. And that's been one of the most gratifying things, both as a professor and now being on social media against my will in promoting my novel. But, the number of people, even former students now, that will send me a picture of them on the couch with their kid watching the movie and say, "Hey, dude, look what we did today." And that's pretty cool.
Hell yeah. I know that you turned down writing sequels because they were direct to video and you didn't feel like justice was going to be done. Have you watched any of the sequels and do you have opinions?
Yeah, I watched #2, and hand to God, that's the last one I've seen, and I think they're up to 13 or 14. And it kind of was very validating in terms of the thing they had said at the time was, we won't be spending as much money, we won't be spending as much time. It's going to be in-house animation. It's not going to involve Spielberg and Lucas and Don Bluth. And it was like, peace out. I'd rather be the guy that created the franchise and moved on than be associated with kind of declining quality, let's say that. But again, clearly there was an audience because they kept coming.
Yeah, there's like 15 of them. But I mean, in my opinion, it's declining quality as well. Now, So one of the things that I find so amazing about that, which is a theme throughout your career, is that you really stick to your integrity as an artist. If you are not feeling something, you're not just going to write it. And so I'm thinking at that time, that's 88. So let's say 89 or 90 is when you maybe get asked to write a sequel. In your mindset, how established did you feel as a writer? How confident were you that the next job was going to come? And was that at all a balancing act for you? Did you consider, well, for the check, maybe I should write this? Or was it immediate, like, you know what? The quality's not good. I'm just not going to do it.
I think the thing that served me most in my career was how stupid and naive I was in terms of, I was very, very fortunate that when I started working in 1977 on that low budget feature where I met my wife, I did work very steadily and there was always something. And I always, I really honestly for 30 years was never unemployed. There was always something going on. And whenever there was a bit of a lull, I would work on a spec script and then get that out into the world. But it was also, it's not completely and totally altruistic. I don't know how to write stuff I don't know how to write. Mm-hmm. So on the projects I turned down, it would always be like, I don't know how to do this well, and I don't want my name on something that isn't well done. So if I can't feel it, if I can't understand it, I'm sure you've seen and read in some of the research, there were jobs that I went in on and I would say, I just don't know how to do this. I don't know how to make it better. I don't know, taking the premise you're pitching to me. If you got something else you want to talk to me about, I'm open. But I just wasn't somebody that knew how to fake it in a way that would serve anybody. Because if you get hired, you take their money, you turn in a crappy script, you're not going to work for them again.
Right.
And again, one of the things I'm really proud about on my resume is there were a lot of places where I worked multiple times. And I feel that happens when they know this is somebody we can depend on. This is somebody who can deliver for us. At the Disney Channel in particular, where I did 12 movies, it was like, he gets us, he knows the brand, he knows how to deliver on the brand. And they kept coming back to me. And so I think, that integrity is something you have to earn. But then once you do, you got to be confident enough not to squander it.
Facts. Love it. I've heard you say that working with Spielberg, one of the best ways to communicate with him was by using movie analogies. I was curious as to whether you remember perhaps any of your favorite ones that you used.
Yeah, it was interesting because it was particularly true both on Amazing Stories and Land Before Time, where it was, and I have said this many times, so I'm comfortable to say it again. I really felt he evolved as a human being when he married Kate Capshaw in terms of being able to get more in touch with his emotions, and a lot of his more emotional movies with Schindler's List and other things, Amistad and things that came after were all post that period of his life. And but at the time, especially on Amazing Stories and Land Before Time, that was just the way his brain worked. And so movie metaphors were always easier. And it was particularly true on romantic conversations because you'd say, like on a Saturday night when you're out with your wife and you go, oh, it's like in Roman Holiday when Audrey Hepburn, and if you got that, then you were good. So It was always having to find that way in. And as soon as he made the connection and then he would reference a movie, you'd go, yeah, like that. And then he would go, yeah, let's do that. But you kind of needed that backdoor to get there.
Cool. All right. Well, jumping on to another project, Monkey Trouble in 1994. One of the most hilarious tidbits I've heard about that movie is that you almost got typecast as the monkey guy after that because they asked you to write a Curious George script. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. I mean, did you shoot it down immediately because you were like, I'm not going to be the monkey guy? Or was there like an idea that you weren't really feeling? Like, give me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. One of the things I say to my students all the time is you really have to be aware from the very beginning that writers get typecast as quickly as actors do. And so I have a couple of friends who really began their careers in the horror genre, and that's what they became known for. And then one friend in particular who then wrote a romantic comedy that nobody wanted to read because it's like, that's not what you do. We know you as the horror guy. And I was very fortunate that I had an agent named Dan Ostroff, who was my agent for more than 20 years before he jumped out of agenting to become a producer. But Dan was somebody, I was his very first client. He got a script of mine optioned when he was still in the mailroom at ICM.
Wow.
And because we were contemporaries and because he had that investment in me as, his first client, we always had would sit down and talk about the long range strategy. Like, how am I going to keep working? And another thing I'll often say to the students is, think of a movie you love, go to IMDb and look at the credits for that writer and see how many writers have a very short shelf life of, 3 to 5 years where they're working pretty consistently and then they disappear.
Yeah.
And with Dan, it was always like, okay, what's the next move that's going to position me in a way that either people are surprised by you did this and you also did that. And, the fact that Year in the Life was pretty much a dramatic family story, followed by some lightweight family stuff, followed by animated, followed by live action. That was always a really deliberate, how do we keep one step ahead of the typecasters? And so with
Brilliant.
Curious George, when I went in for the meeting, it was pretty much a turn down in the room just because, you guys, I don't want to be the monkey guy. Monkey Trouble is out. It's doing well. People are responding. But as soon as I do a second movie, then he's the monkey guy. And I'd rather move on.
Absolutely. The buddy primate genre was a big genre in the 90s, but it kind of left in the 90s.
Exactly.
Well, speaking of horror, you wrote 2 Goosebumps PC games, Attack of the Mutant and Escape from Horrorland, for DreamWorks, and that was through Spielberg, correct?
Yeah.
Was that your first foray into writing horror and spooky stuff?
Yeah, and it was also the first any kind of interactive video game world. And one of the things, that was in the day of CD-ROM video games.
Yeah.
And the biggest challenge of that was you had to do the sprouting storylines where, if you took this door, this happened. If you went that door, and eventually things converged.
Yeah, because you could make so many different choices.
Yeah. And so ultimately, the script for especially Escape from Horrorland looks like a phone book. It was about 200 pages because of all the branching and, all of that. But each time you had to find a way after 2 or 3 steps that it would come back to a common point and then diverge again and come back and, do all of that. So in addition to the spooky stuff, it was the challenge of the multiple storylines and making sure, like I said, when those convergences need to happen. And so it was interesting and challenging, but I was also working with a really smart team of people that this was their world. They were gamers, they were in the gaming world. And they were really, really helpful in terms of my education in that line of work, which I had never done before.
Did you ultimately enjoy that experience, or did you feel it was a little too tedious?
It was a lot of fun, but I was happy when it was done also for that. I am much more a beginning, middle, and end storyteller.
Sure.
And one of the things that used to infuriate me in the day was when directors would talk about, we did a test screening and then I went back and reshot the ending.
Yeah.
And the thing that always got me so angry was like, if you don't know the ending of the story you're telling, you should not be telling a story. And if an audience can dictate how your story ends,
Right,
party
yeah.
foul. And because I was always so, just about the story. If I've got something to say, I've got something that I want to impart to the world, I should know how it ends and not wait for other people to tell me.
Sure. Especially like a small group of people that like randomly said it on a Tuesday afternoon. Yeah.
Exactly.
Those are the only 2 games that you've written.
Yeah.
You obviously did not want to revisit per se. Those games are so underrated, by the way, man. Big cast. One of them had Jeff Goldblum as Dracula. One of them had Adam West and James Belushi as voices. Like pretty serious stuff for the time.
Yeah. Isabella Rossellini's in one of them.
Yes, that's right. And Eric Lloyd. Yeah.
Hello and welcome to Horrorland Plaza. Come closer, come closer. Not that close. I'm not a Who concert.
One of my favorite stories that you've told on social media, and actually it was this story that led me to discover that you were on social media, was about Rugrats.
When they were going to do the first feature film, I was brought in, and Klasky Schupo were the creators of Rugrats and the owner of the studio. They were a really, really interesting couple because they had been married, they had 2 children, they were divorced, but still business partners.
Right.
And they had really, really different styles of working, but I loved both of them. I really enjoyed working with them. I got to work with all the staff and, writers on the series were involved initially in kind of breaking the story for the movie. It was a co-production between Nickelodeon and Paramount. We would meet in a room at Klasky Schupo with a big whiteboard, spitballing ideas and getting things up and collating from different, everybody pitching different ideas and trying to put them together. We got pretty deep into getting the story where we were happy with, pitching it to Paramount. And as the anecdote on social media goes, at some point in that process, they said, this really isn't working because the premise that you're working with is just putting the Rugrats in way too much danger. We would never do that. And then, we're sorry, but we're replacing you. The great thing was the writers they brought in after me were 2 guys that I knew. They were a writing team. I was actually at a birthday party for John Pomeroy, Don Bluth's producer, and they came up to me and they go, "Hey, just so you know, we're getting paid bupkis on this movie because when our agents went to negotiate, they said they had to pay off your contract before they could bring somebody new on. And they said to our agent, Krieger got all the money. There's nothing left for your guys. Sorry." And I said, "Yeah, well, you know what? It sucks to be you. So see you later." So that happened. But basically, then when the movie came out, 97% of the plot was exactly what I had pitched, with some slight changes in the locations, but basically the same story. And for some reason, which I don't even know who, what, how, where, on IMDb, I have an additional material by credit.
You do, yeah. Do you think that there was something else going on? Because the fact that they gave you the reason that's like, it's too much danger, the movie has them in lots and lots of danger. Was there something else political going on behind the scenes as to why they said that to you?
Always.
Yeah, okay.
And, if we had the time, I could give you 15 other examples of that as well, where, what you get told, what your agent gets told, what other people get told, usually has nothing to do with it. And especially in a project like that, when there's multiple entities of Nickelodeon and Klasky-Schupo and Paramount, there's often power struggles behind the scenes between all those entities as well. And I think in part I was perceived as the Klasky-Schupo writer, and the Nickelodeon person had somebody that, they had a better relationship with. So you really never know what all that internal politics is about. And for me, it was also something that I never took personally, because I will say again to my students, you're really not a Hollywood writer until you've been fired a couple times. So
facts. That's showbiz.
Yeah. Yep.
Cetus Lapidus! Cetus Lapidus! Cetus Lapidus! Cetus Lapidus! Cetus Lapidus! Cetus Lapidus! Cetus Lapidus!
I want to jump into the DCOM era, which is a very prolific one for you, which began with Zenon. And of course, that opportunity came to you because of the wonderful world of Disney movies you had worked on before, right? Parent Trap 2 and Freaky Friday?
Yep.
I did a brief pass on this, so you'll confirm if I'm incorrect, but I don't think that anyone has written more DCOMs than you have.
No.
Okay, so that's a Guinness Book of World Records record right there.
Well, one of the really nice badge of honors was when they held a party celebrating the first 50 movies. And it was this big bash, and Gary Marsh, who was the head of the network, got up at the thing and he said, we're so pleased that we've now done 50 movies. They're incredible success. They're doing this and that. And I have to acknowledge the fact that one guy wrote 10 of the first 50, and that was me. So
wow,
that was kind of cool. And then the second badge of honor was when they reached the 100th milestone, and I was long gone from there and teaching, and I got invited to the party for the 100th movie. And that night, Gary said, when people come up to me to talk about the DCOMs, most people think they want to talk about High School Musical. But he said, the truth is I get more questions and comments about Zenon and Smart House than any of the others. And I went, yeah, there you go.
Your DCOMs were distinct from the others, and I've seen all of them multiple times. Were distinct in that it was deeper. It felt real. They were real. Like, I think a part of it, as you mentioned, you don't talk down to kids, and you present real. I mean, Smart House. And I know you've talked about this before, but the part where they're discussing the passing of the mother, and the dad says, like, you're not the only one that lost someone, right? It's not all about you. When you watch that again, growing up, you're like, oh shit, man! Like, this movie really went in there. Like, he's feeling something too, and there's a lot going on there.
Yeah.
So when you went in for Zenon, one of the things that you were told is that the writers they brought in before, it wasn't working because they were all trying to do 90210 meets Star Trek. And you said, after looking at the source material, it seems to me like it's Eloise at the plaza at a space station.
Correct.
What do you think gave you that sensibility over the way that the other writers were looking at it?
Just do your research, so know who it is you're talking to, know what their brand is, know what they do. And one of the things I had done, because the whole DCOM franchise was brand new at that point.
Right.
And when I first got approached about the meeting, I said, have you finished any of them yet? And they said, Under Wraps, which was the Mummy movie.
Yeah.
They said, is in post-production. We have a rough cut, but the sound isn't fixed yet. The color isn't fixed yet, but we have a rough cut. And I said, may I please see that before I go in for the meeting? And they sent me a VHS copy of the rough cut. And I watched it, and it's like, okay, this is what this franchise is. And knowing like who the targeted audience was, knowing where the boundaries were in terms of how far you could push things, but how you had to walk that line that it was still appropriate for younger kids, and having all of that knowledge and having read the source material, which I've said before was just a very thin kids picture book called Zenon Girl of the 21st Century. And basically what's in the book that survived to the movie is she's a kid living on the space station who's very curious and has a crush on a rock star named Protozoa.
Right.
So those elements are all in the book. And then, everything about the plot and Lutz and the space station and the sabotage, all that was stuff that I brought to it.
Yeah.
But it was bringing it with the knowledge of here's the kind of adventures. And then the other thing is, I was very, very, very much a Disney kid growing up myself. And so Swiss Family Robinson and Absent Minded Professor, and as you referenced, the original Parent Trap, those were my childhood. And so it was like, I want to replicate those feelings and those emotions and those adventures now for a new generation to affect them the way those movies affected me. And the common theme in all of them, both past and present, is kid empowerment. Kid wish fulfillment. Wouldn't it be cool if I could?
Yeah.
And so there was always that element of that curiosity, that pushing the boundaries, that aspirational stuff that I wanted to bring to all the decoms I did, because that's the stuff that resonated with me as a kid.
Love it, man. I know that you, in research for that film and potentially as research for Smart House 2, you'll correct me if that's incorrect, you spent time at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena.
Yep.
Did you personally make a cold call, or did you have someone at Disney do it for you?
Nope, I did it. But when you can say, I'm writing a film for Disney, that opens doors pretty well to begin with. I mean, I don't remember anybody ever questioning, prove it or get a badge from Disney or anything. It was just sort of, here's what's up, and and then it was always, and here's the other things I've done if you want to look me up and do any research. So there was, a little bit of a resume behind me, but it was just always me taking the initiative and, who would be helpful. Years ago, I wrote a mummy movie for Ron Howard that never got made. I ended up going on an archaeological dig with my wife and Gus when he was 2 years old, because I hooked up with the archaeology department at UCLA, and they said, oh, we're doing this dig out in the desert in a couple of weeks. Do you want to come? And we went with them for the weekend. And, again, just something that I took the initiative. I want to learn about this. I want to be able to write authentically about it.
I'm so disappointed that movie never got made. Was it like a mummy movie or like the mummy movie, like Universal?
No, it was a mummy comedy, but the premise was basically a kind of like a King Tut character. The mummy got reawakened and came back, and he was a pissed off kid king that still wanted to be in charge of everything because he was a king and he was 10 years old.
Yeah.
So that was the premise of it. And Ron had a deal at Fox at the time, but the movie didn't get made, but we had a lot of fun writing it.
Wow. And you got to go on an archaeological dig.
Exactly.
Wow, that's cool, man. So when you do that, when you go to, let's say, the Jet Propulsion Lab, what's sort of like the prompt you give these guys? Like, hey, can you just show me around? Or do you say what can you show me that looks like it's about to be the future? Like, what new tech are you working on?
Yeah, it was more of that, because one of the things that I wanted to do, and again, this is like doing my due diligence, was a lot of science fiction often makes these phenomenal leaps 50 years in the future, and suddenly it's flying cars and people in aluminum clothes and all the rest of it. And I started from the premise of going back 50 years. And it was like, we were still driving automobiles. Men wear suits to work. Women wear dresses. It is like things change, but they're not these giant leaps in a very short period of time. And because Zenon was 50 years in the future, I was talking to them about, what's the kind of tech you're currently working on? Where do you see the extrapolation of it? And then, I've done probably 15 interviews with various podcasts and tech magazines and online places about, dude, you predicted the future. They have iPads in Zenon, and they have hologram teachers and
facts,
and all of this. And like with the iPad, in Zenon, it was the Zap pads.
Yep.
But my thinking was simply, we started with computers that took up a whole room.
Yep.
We went to these big, heavy desktops. We got the smaller desktops. We've now got laptops. The next thing is going to be a fully portable screen. And, I don't think I was a genius. It was just sort of like look behind and look forward and make some, leaps. And that's kind of where that came from.
You even called Alexa, man.
Well, my favorite thing when I got on social media, there was a post from Katie Seagal, who played Pat, saying, "Where are my royalties? I was the OG Alexa."
Facts though.
True wonder is harder to come by, but there's always magic at the movies.
My favorite Stu Krieger decom is Phantom of the Megaplex.
Nice.
When that movie came up, they just had the title and they were like, give us a movie. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what inspired you to come up with that story.
The person that I worked most intimately with during all my time at the Disney Channel was Michael Healy, who was the head of movies there. And Michael had this incredible story sense. He was really, really good. Probably the best executive I ever worked with in terms of being able to look at the big picture of what is this movie about and not get mired in the minutia of it all. And so he was the one that called me and he said, I don't know if it was a dream or what, but he said, I woke up with this title in my head, Phantom of the Megaplex. What do you think the movie would be? And he said, this was a phone call first. He said, take a couple days to noodle on it and come on in when you're ready and we'll talk about it and kind of spitball through. And so, again, going back to the original Phantom of the Opera, what was that all about? And then thinking about the modern day megaplexes and, who are the kids working there and what are some of the issues? And like you said, for me, I've always been a character-driven writer. So I always start from the premise of who's my lead? What does he want? What's in the way of that want? Asking some of those very, very basic questions. So I don't start from plot. I start from character. And then the characters tell me the story.
Sure.
And so, thinking about this kid who was kind of overly ambitious and overly hardworking and hard on himself and not taking time out for real life. And, for him, it was just this important job while some of the other kids were there because they loved the movies and they loved the fantasy of it. And then who is our Phantom and wanting the misdirect of, the Mickey Rooney character who was the old time movie fan and all of those things, just putting all those elements together and building the story from there. And then always with the ensembles, another lesson I'm always giving my students is if this is my lead, who are the interesting people to surround him by that are going to bump up against him, create conflict, create comedy, create, all those. So, and then building the other kids out, it was all of who would be those people around Pete and what to each of them bring to the ensemble to add flesh to the story.
It's always been shocking to me that that's the only spooky themed decom that you did, being that at a certain point in that era, you were basically, I would imagine, just known to the network as he's the decom guy. You want a solid one, he can crank them out, get it done. Were you approached for any spooky ones that you didn't write that, that ended up getting made by other people or written by other people? Did you have any ideas for spooky themed ones that didn't get made?
No. Part of the reason I was there so prolifically was in the beginning, if you remember, they were premiering a movie a month.
Yeah.
So the first Friday of every month was a new movie. And so a lot of them kind of, like you mentioned at the very beginning, my batting average was I was either the only or the last writer on all of them. And the last writer is the person that gets the film greenlit, that we got a script we can shoot, let's go. But a lot of times I was working on 3 at once because it would be, I was finishing Zenon and the Smart House was already a script that they owned. And they just were like the structure of it, the premise of it, all that we're really happy with. We don't feel like the heart is there yet. So we need you to come in and do a character pass and kind of reconfigure it in any way that it's got a little bit more depth, a little bit more heart. That's what you do it. But we need it really quickly because right after Zenon, we're in production. They were in pre-production on, several at the same time and knowing which order things were shooting in. And so I know it was the first Zenon, Smart House, and I'm forgetting what number 3 was, but I was working on those 3 all at once. And it would be turn in a draft and while you're waiting for notes on that, go back to the other one and move it forward because we got to go.
Yeah.
And then with a project like True Confessions, a producer that I had worked with on other projects brought me the book. It was based on a book. And she said, I think this would make a great decom and they know you, they love you. Would you want to partner with me? I'll produce it, you write it. And when I called them about it, they said, to be very honest with you, 2 other different sets of writers had brought it into us, so we passed both times. But we know you, we love you. Come in and tell us your take. And Jana Memel, the producer, she and I went in and I pitched my take, and they go, "Great, let's go." And that was another one. 6 weeks later, they were shooting the movie because they had a really tight window with Shia between seasons of Even Stevens. Mm-hmm. They could do the movie and then get him back to the series.
During that era, what were your favorite decoms that were not yours if you were watching them?
I didn't get to watch a whole lot of them just because I was as busy as I was with them. There was a couple times where they did big star-studded premiere type things that I got to go to because I could take my kids.
Yeah.
And they get to meet everybody and see everybody. So I remember my daughter and a friend of hers, I took them to the Cadet Kelly premiere with Hilary Duff. And
cool, yeah.
That was very exciting and a lot of fun. There was Eddie's Bake Off, Cook Off, whatever Eddie's.
Yes,
whatever
yeah.
A friend of mine, Paul Hohen, directed that, and I saw that and loved it. Brink, I really very much enjoyed.
Classic.
Yeah, they were doing good stuff in that era.
They were, man. They were, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all, especially with Disney Plus out now, everything's resurging. I'm sure you've seen sort of residuals for the time, and then boom, Disney Plus.
Big time.
Yeah, love it. If you could bring back just one thing from the 90s, what would it be?
Maybe the decoms. I mean, every once in a while they're doing a movie now, but not with that rhythm, not with that frequency, not with that same heart and passion. And it's been one of the great rewards, like I said, of both teaching and being on social media, because one of the things about Hollywood that I've said many times before is that you are never a success when you're in it. No matter what you've done, it's always about the next job, and jobs that look like they're happening and fall apart, and things that are in development and you get fired off of, or whatever it is. You just have no sense of, am I making any impact? Does anybody care?
Right.
And as soon as I started teaching, at least we're on the quarter system at Riverside, and at least once or twice a quarter from the very beginning, kids would kind of timidly poke their head in my office and go, I just wanted to say hi because, dude, you wrote my childhood. And that's pretty cool. You know,
I bet that never gets old.
Never gets old. And one of the great things about having the friendship with Haley Mills that you mentioned is Turner Classic Movies does a film festival in Hollywood every year. And 6 or 7 years ago, they were honoring her, and she invited my wife and I to come with her for the day. And she was being interviewed by Leonard Maltin. And one of the questions was, you know, some of these movies are now 50 years old and people are still so fanatic about them. When people come up and want to talk to you about Parent Trap or Pollyanna, is that hard for you? And she said, no, how can it possibly ever get old when people are coming to tell you the impact you had on their childhood and how much you meant to them? It's never, ever going to be old, no matter how, you know, far in the past that becomes. It's still incredibly heartwarming and touching to hear.
Love that. And what a legacy that you've created.
We tried.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today. But not only for your time, thanks for your amazing writing that gave us some of the most significant movies from our childhood, for the laughter and the tears. Thanks for it all, man. I really appreciate you.
Well, thank you, Tenn. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate the great research you did and the intelligent questions, and it was a really fun conversation.
I'm glad. I'm so glad. And ladies and gentlemen, until next time, I'm all grown up.
SYKE.
I'm all grown up. SYKE.